Interfaces offer an amazing user experience.
Interfaces are the technology that let you pause and stop.
Interfaces are online video sites like Hulu.
Interfaces let us fast forward through shows, but most importantly, fast forward through advertising.
Interfaces don't bombard us with information. They're very easy to use because less is more.
Interfaces provide the metadata that companies use to make advertisements and shows.
Interface? I actually don't even know what that is. I think it's something tech related, but I don't really know.
Interfaces are the objects that we use to interact with our computers, like keyboards and mouses.
An interface is the way you interact with a platform.
Interfaces are not always visible, but are also algorithms like the ones behind Netflix and YouTube.
Defining the term interface is extremely difficult, as there are multiple levels to any interface. The interface is what appears on the screen before you, such as this Netflix page, and then the various shows and movies it offers are another level of interfaces. The mouse or keyboard that the user uses to interact with the screen are also interfaces. Interfaces are also invisible, such as the collaborative algorithm used to drive the user experience behind Netflix. David Chamberlain would say that interfaces are sites of work, play, politics, and historical development, but also reveal tensions among individuals, corporations, freedom, and control.
The power is in the possibly black leather gloved hands of the people using the tech, but for all of the potentially rotten things going down behind the big red curtain of big data, the men behind which you should certainly pay no attention to, there's also a lot to be said about the positive stuff. The power of search and being able to find what you're looking for, being able to relate seemingly worlds apart pieces of data, and being able to create or uncover relationships where we never thought they existed.
Netflix is the perfect example in showing how interfaces can foster agency for the user experience, while also using the platforms to extract data for surveillance and ultimately profit. When using Netflix, the user first and foremost recognizes the agency that the site allows to the more physical interfaces. When the user logs into the Netflix site, interfaces are used to create different profiles for each member on a Netflix account, such as the mother, daughter, and son. Once the user chooses their profile, they are then posed with the question of how to choose content. We immediately see that we are given the option to scroll down through the various genres of TV and film and look at Netflix suggestions. Some people trust that Netflix has picked the correct content and scroll through these programs, but others want to search on their own. At the top of the page is the Browse interface. When the user clicks on the browser interface, they are invited to click on several other interfaces to access content, such as My List. The My List interface shows a list of all of the past shows and movies that the viewer has watched on Netflix. If the viewer is still not satisfied, they can click on New Arrivals, which is an interface that shows all the new releases within the various genres of the industry that Netflix supports. If the viewer is still not satisfied and has a particular title, star, or genre in mind that they want to watch, they can use the search interface to access specific desired shows and movies. Once the user chooses their content, the program will fill the entire screen. However, another layer of interfaces will come up on this screen. The user is provided with interfaces that allow them to play, pause, fast forward, and rewind through the content. The user can mute the show or add subtitles. The viewer can even look at various other episodes within the season of a particular show or within past seasons. These interfaces are all designed to make the user experience better while watching the shows we choose, thus allowing for individual agency and control. Then there are the interfaces of Netflix that are visible to the user but not as prominent in the user experience. Interfaces such as Case Preferences interface, which can be accessed in account settings, in which the user can tell Netflix where their taste preferences are based on categories such as moods, storylines, genres, and more. The user rates how often they watch content of certain moods, such as absurd, cerebral, or chilling, by checking never, sometimes, or often. If you look all the way to the right, you can even click on the interface Need Some Examples, and various options for each category pop up. This interface allows the user more control over the content that Netflix chooses for them and essentially becomes part of the algorithm. David Chamberlain would say that the power of scripted spaces, such as those on the Netflix interface, is that they are entered to hide their design, to place the emphasis on the experience of the visitor rather than the genius of the system. Netflix can use all the information gathered on its taste preferences interface for later profit with its original programming and/or algorithm. Netflix does not want the user to realize that all of their actions on the site are being surveilled and can be used for profit. Let's take a look at the use of information submitted portion of the terms of agreement. It says, Netflix is free to use any comments, information, ideas, concepts, reviews, or techniques, or any other material contained in any communication you may send to us through feedback, including responses to questionnaires, or through postings to the Netflix service, including the Netflix website and user interfaces, worldwide and in perpetuity, without further compensation, acknowledgement, or payment to you for any purpose whatsoever, including but not limited to developing, manufacturing, and marketing products and creating, modifying, or improving the Netflix service. As David Chamberlain would say, while consumers exert a moment of control while using the site to find content that they wish to watch, they are also yielding data to be commodified by a particular corporate interest. The information that Netflix gets every time the user clicks on its interfaces can be used to sell to advertisers, marketers, corporations, or institutions. Taina Bucher would say that interfaces oscillate between what can and should be seen and what should not and cannot be seen, between who can and cannot see who. Netflix wants its users to interact with its site without revealing their potential for profit behind the physical interface.
All of the actions that you take as a Netflix customer can be reduced to some form of data.
That data is used to create a mathematical model or algorithm to help Netflix predict which movies you might enjoy watching. The more data the web-based DVD rental company gathers on you, the closer its algorithm gets to predicting your movie preferences.
Not just that you like Annie Hall, but that you like Woody Allen movies that are made in the 70s, but not the ones that were made in the 80s.
The system relies on collaborative filtering, plugging user information about a particular product into a mathematical equation. That equation then spits out recommendations for other products that user might enjoy.
Interfaces such as those on Netflix present themselves as simply functional non-places, but are in fact the experimental moment of more complex interactive scripted spaces that reveal much about the status of television in the digital era.
Pariser warns that, quote, algorithmic induction can lead to a kind of information determinism, where our past click streams can entirely decide our future. He fears, quote, a public sphere sorted and manipulated by algorithms. Can you collect and operate on and use data without changing it? It's kind of like ye olde observer effect, which warns that the very moment you measure or observe something, you run the risk of changing that thing. When it's unclear who has the agency, do I control my internet search result destiny? Does Google? Does, I don't know, Coca-Cola?
Now Netflix is piling millions of dollars into its own commissions, like the prison drama Orange is the New Black.
You take all the data and all the viewing behavior and say, there's actually an enormous audience for that show, and we could invest very aggressively for it.
The danger of using a formula to buy programs rather than relying on human beings with insights and gut instincts is that perhaps you're not going to get these really genuinely different off-the-wall programs that no one saw coming.
We were doing the opposite of that with it, though, is we're putting things on television that otherwise would never be put on American television or television around the world. Orange is the New Black is a cast made up of nearly all women. It's the most ethnically and physically diverse cast on television. None of the actresses that are cast in those roles are kind of the typical sitcom actress that you'd see on television today.
When looking at interfaces, the question of who has the agency often supersedes the real question. It is clear that both the user and the technology exert some form of agency. The users provided agency on Netflix when choosing their content, and in turn the technology has agency when collecting user data. But it should not be looked at through the perspective of the user and the technology as separate entities, but as a whole. The user chooses shows and movies. The technology evaluates the user's past content and uses the data to create and select new content for the user, and the process repeats itself. The users are in effect part of the technology, and the technology is further part of the user experience. Lucy Suchman claims that interfaces are no longer a platform or point of exchange for two separate entities. The interaction of the user and interface is an intra-action, in which there is an interdependence of the entities and the mutual coming together to constitute one. The interaction between the user and interface is the result of intra-actions that create the entities themselves.